Overcrowding is a ticking time bomb, says the chief prisons inspector. We're going to read into this exclusive from The Independent, you guys. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is REGANELITE here with an exclusive from The Independent with the headline that the last-ditch government plans to free up cells, not enough to prevent overcrowding problems from blowing up, the prison watchdog has warned. Guys, it is a ticking time bomb. You know, the overcrowding in prisons is not. There's so many factors to take in before we read into it, guys. There's obviously we've talked. I had a video not too long ago talking about talking about drugs. That was on the live stream on the Snowflakes Viewpoint, where we talked about how drugs are becoming a major influence within the UK. It's on the rise, and the laws that we have, if people are caught taking certain drugs, they're going to end up going in prison. That's just one of many crimes where people are in prison. Where did they need to be in prison for those drugs? Could there have not been a ways around it? Should certain drugs be made legal so that they can avoid being in prison? That's one way of reducing the prison service, obviously. The changing of class drugs, cleansing of the class A, class B sort of drugs. That's the other thing. The other thing as well is the next step of also overcrowding is tied to the cost of living crisis. Why is this tied to the cost of living crisis, you ask? Well, there's a simple fact of the matter: if people aren't getting to the food banks, or they're not getting what they need at food banks, or they're desperate trying to make ends meet, they're going to end up stealing. And there are cases where people who have stolen to get food end up in prison. I know it may seem a bit daft, but unfortunately we have had those cases. Now, some retailers are turning a bit of a blind eye to those who are desperate for food. But again, it is tied to it. You know, the whole cost of living is tied to prisons from that regard. Another problem that we have, of course, is the court systems, the courts and processes that we have, because we are lacking many courts. Because obviously austerity. Let's not forget that has also played a part in the processing of criminals as well. That's taken a long time for criminals to get processed as well, whether they find guilty, not guilty, whatever. And also on the fact of the victims as well. The victims having to wait a long time to get their justice heard in court as well. And there could be a case where somebody is basically on remand for like 6 months or whatever, and then they find themselves not guilty. Well, they've been on remand for like 6 months to 12 months or whatever, finally have their case, and then they end up being proven not guilty. So, which I think is a very important point to make as well. There was one other factor I just totally forgot on my mind, but rehabilitation, of course, rehabilitation. The whole point of when someone is convicted of a crime, as you guys know, is they need to be rehabilitated so that they are released back into the world as a different person. I'm curious to know what the statistics are, how many reoccurring offences are, what the percentage of reoccurring offences of criminals in the UK are. I'm curious to know that number, because it must be very high, because we clearly are not rehabilitating people when people coming out and they're going straight back in. It's so that what is the point of locking people up, throwing away the key and all that on those with lesser crimes? Yeah, those are the lesser crimes. Those who steal, those who do drugs, those on the echelons. I'm not talking about the murders and the rapes. That's a very different. I'm not talking about them specifically. I'm talking about the lower crime thresholds, the ones that people are in jail for right now. Whether it's taking drugs, whether it is stealing, whether it is drunk and disorderly. What are we doing to ensure that these people learn from their mistakes, so that when they're go back into the world, that they don't learn to act like these again? What are we doing to respond to them? Those are the ones I think are also clogging up the prison system. So how can we reduce those numbers as well? What's the rehabilitation system like? Is it working? What things do we have in place as well? So there's also that caveat to take in place as well. And then of course there is there is the argument that people have made about, I've seen one or two comments about talking about capital punishment. Now, I'm against capital punishment. Why am I against capital punishment? Because I think it's a get out of jail free card for criminals. Simply put, I get, yeah, people will make the argument, well, it costs them, we're paying taxpayers money for them to sit and rot in a prison cell. Why not just put them in a chair or give them the anaesthetic and be done with them? Like I said, it's a get out jail free card for them for what they've done. No, people who commit such atrocities, in my opinion, whether it is rape, brutal murders, or the highest echelons of criminality, guys, whatever, the highest echelons I'm talking about, they should no way be given capital punishment. It is a get out of jail free card for them. Yeah, executing their life. No. For me, it is making them rot in a solitary confinement for the rest of their lives. For me, that is the ultimate punishment for me, because you are making them rot away. You put them on that chair or sticking the lethal injection to put them to sleep. To me, it's a get out of jail free card, capital punishment for me. And you might think, yeah, it's good. You're thinking about it from a taxpayer point of view. I'm thinking about it from a justice point of view. That's how I'm looking at that, from a justice point of view. But I'm also somebody who believes in second chances as well. But like, every case is different, obviously. But we have this overcrowding ticking time bomb, guys. So what are we doing about it? And is the government aware of this ticking time bomb? So the UK must decide at what point of jail is, what the point of jail is. The Chief Inspector of Prisons has warned, as it suggests there are poor use of taxpayers' money, with criminals becoming more dangerous while inside. Charlie Taylor says it's almost inevitable that whoever wins the next general election will be forced to confront the question of what prisons should be for, warning that they merely locking up people in revolting conditions for ever longer periods risks creating more victims of crime, not fewer. Mr. Taylor also issued a stark warning over the government's last efforts to free up space in prisons, and he said that overcrowding is a ticking time bomb, and that plans to release inmates early and spare up some offenders' jails will not be enough to prevent the issue from blowing up. It comes after a tumultuous year in which the escape of Daniel Khalife served to intensify the spotlight on the crisis unfolding behind bars as prisons ran out of space, with ministers forced to release inmates early for the first time in 15 years. In an interview with the Independent, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector also warned that prison inspectors have issued a record 5 emergency warnings to the Justice Secretary this year. So the Justice Secretary, has been warned 5 times this year. Emergency warnings, been told. What is he doing about it? Conditions inside prisons are simply unacceptable, with officers wading through open sewage in HMP Bedford. Open sewage? Really? Drugs are pouring into prisons, fueling violence as inmates become addicted behind bars. What are we doing to stop drugs getting in? Longer sentences to be driven are driving overcrowding and harming rehabilitation. Again, how are we tackling all these things? We've talked about right at the start of the video, guys. Pointing to the current state of a number of prisons, Mr. Taylor said it would be incredibly surprising if people were not more likely to reoffend after being in jail, given that many inmates are locked in incredibly squalid cells for 23 hours a day, and some developing drug habits and lack access to rehabilitation support. At a cost of $50,000 a year to keep someone locked up, it doesn't feel like a great use of taxpayer money, he said, adding, we should be having prisons that create fewer victims that are not going to end up creating more victims. Unfortunately, as a country, we need to decide on who we want to lock up and how long we want to lock people up for, and what we actually want to happen to them. We simply do not want to lock people up, throw away the key, and keep them in revolving conditions. Well, that's fine, but the danger then is when do these people come out of prison? They will be far worse when they went in. They will cause more mayhem in communities, and they will create more victims of crime. Sentencing left have increased by a third in the space of a decade, in line with the tough on crime rhetoric espouted by successive governments. And Mr. Taylor warned that this was fueling overcrowding with a knock-on effect on rehabilitation. This is further exacerbated by the record high backlog of cases in the courts, which has seen more people than ever trapped behind bars while awaiting trial. Exactly. This is why the point I made, is that if they're not even getting their date in court and they're being waiting for trial behind bars, where some of them may be proven to find that their case is dismissed or not guilty, because everyone needs to be tried. And if they're being held in a trial, being held for like a year or so, then it's not only is the wrong person being held up and found out they're innocent, but it's also even worse than the victim, who's been waiting like a year or whatever for their case to be heard, and then you find out that that's not even the right person. There's so many scenarios here where this can go wrong. Innocent people are suffering just as much as guilty people in this. Against this backdrop, suicides and serious violence soared by nearly a quarter in men's jails in the last year, while in the women's estate, assaults on staff hit an all-time high and self-harm soared by 63%, a cocktail Mr. Taylor previously said was symptomatic of a system under enormous strain. This, unfortunately, again, like, what are we doing about this? The government knows this is happening, and they're not doing anything to prevent it. And this is not just Conservatives. Labour also, previously, have they been doing enough to ensure that prisoners are getting everything that they need as well in the past? The questions need to be asked there. The Chief Inspector said it was absolutely unprecedented that he had been forced to issue a record 5 urgent notifications in the past year. A protocol deployed very sparsely for prisons in a really terrible state, which gives the Justice Secretary 28 days to respond with an emergency plan of action. It is particularly concerning that 3 of those jails were being put into emergency measures for the second time, with each of the 3 having a very high chunk of remand prisoners who are often homeless, battling addiction and facing mental health difficulties instead. Yeah, mental health, guys. How many times have I talked about it? This all ties in. This all ties in. This also affects the economy as well, guys. Don't forget, when we don't have a proper prison system. It's all tied in together. It's important to remember that. While these particularly fragile prisons can just about cling on with strong leadership, we find these things unraveling very quickly as soon as there is a change in governor, Mr. Taylor said. The increase of drugs bedding into an already very violent situation just adds to risks that these prisons face, he said, warning of a perfect storm of predatory drug dealing gangs in a captive and vulnerable market. Point to HMP Woodhill, where 38% of prisoners tested positive for an illegal substance, he added. When you've got drugs and persuades in a prison, what that means is that drugs equal debt, and debt equals violence, and drug debts get enforced by violence. In HMP Lincoln Hall, more than a fifth of inmates said they had developed a drug habit while in prison. You potentially come out with a bigger problem than when you went in, and that inevitably affects your ability to get work and pulls you into a world of crime. So that's an enormous concern for us. In October, the Justice Secretary Alex Chalk announced an emergency plan to free prisoners early and asked judges not to jail offenders who were given a sentence of less than a year. But the Chief Inspector fears that the government will have to go further still. Even with those measures in place, it still looks as if the number of places available won't be able to keep pace with the number of prisoners coming in, Mr. Taylor warns. Ministers will then have to make decisions about what they're going to do, about whether they want to introduce more early prisons or can manage to squeeze out more prison spaces. Prisoners are already increasingly forced to double up in cells designed by the Victorians for one person, Mr. Taylor warned. Analysing by the analyst from the Independent in October revealed that 78 of the 124 jails in England and Wales had a population greater than the number they were supposed to hold. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Justice has paused all non-critical maintenance work despite the harrowing state of many prisons. These non-critical maintenance work will turn into critical the longer that they are left as well. That's another key factor. Mr. Taylor highlighted a recent visit to Bedford, where prison officers working in an underground isolation unit housing prisoners who are often incredibly mentally unwell and should be in a hospital were forced away into raw sewage in Wellington boots every time heavy rain overloaded the faulty pipes. In the same prison, he recalled being completely overwhelmed by the smell of black mould as he visited a 3-man cell whose inhabitants were self-isolating for 23 hours a day for fear of violence, while the lack of toilets in some prisons means that some inmates are forced to defecate in buckets and throw their waste out the window, visibly staining the prison walls outside. This is absolutely disgusting. Being treated like animals, they are. And in another cell, inspectors encounter a prisoner at risk of self-harm who had been left in a cell with jagged broken glass in his window. Mr. Taylor said, "This shows the level of neglect and it's just enormously concerning. It's not acceptable." Despite being in a new prison set that comes into use near New York and another in Leicester already filling up, Mr. Taylor warned that even the lower range of population projections still puts prisons into the red fairly quickly, with many false ministers have to wider conversations about their approach to criminal justice. We report on what we see, and what we see is a moment of a system that is full, he says. There's going to be an election probably next year, so whoever the new government is has an opportunity to come in and do some thinking about prisons and answer some of these questions about what prisons are for. And the population pressures are going to mean that it's almost inevitable that some versions of that conversation need to take place, because the pressure on the population is going to go up. A Ministry of Justice spokesperson has said that public protection is our priority, which is why we're keeping the most dangerous offenders behind bars for longer, while reforming short sentences and getting more prisoners into work to help break the cycle of reoffending and see fewer people become victims. Also creating an additional 20,000 modern prison places, with the biggest prison expansion program since the Victorian era, with over a quarter already built, helping to rehabilitate offenders and keep our streets safe. Nothing but small talk from the government as always, guys, because they're just not doing enough. Another, we talked about prisons before, and I think it was important for us to hear from the chief prison inspector just how bad things are in them, and some of those examples there just highlight some of the massive issues that our prison systems, in particular in England, are facing, guys. And it's really, really bad. And also the victims of those who have suffered at the hands of some of these criminals are going to be getting out early, or some of them getting out early for crimes that they committed, and they may reoffend again. Just too many negative things, guys. But what do you guys think? What should be done? What can be done between now and the next general election? Can the Conservatives do anything? Should they be doing something? What would you recommend to do? Perhaps maybe we should make space on the bars for them. I don't know. But prisons right now are getting overcrowded. And like he said, it's a ticking time bomb. So any ideas, let me know in the comment section down below. Hit the like button, be greatly appreciated. Share this across social media. Hit that bell notification icon so you'll be notified of when I upload another video. And if you want to financially support me, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member, or joining me on Patreon, or buying me a coffee. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to catch you all very, very soon.